swamps of Jersey, this is We Persisted podcast series. Today, public education is looked at as a failure and teachers are to blame. Well, enough is enough. All around the country, from Oklahoma, Los Angeles, West Virginia, Arizona, North Carolina, Oakland, and now Denver, teacher strikes are igniting. Is a teacher resistance movement finally catching fire? In the context of New Jersey, we will be discussing how neoliberal policies, like former Governor Chris Christie's education reform policies, and growing privatization in education, along with derogatory rhetoric towards teachers, have impacted New Jersey teacher experiences and education as a whole. We will also talk about the ways in which those grievances are driving and fueling teacher-resistant movements in and outside the classroom as a result of these grievances. We will finally go behind the scenes into the lives of extraordinary teachers. We will finally give them the bully pulpit to share their own story, one that defines what it is like being a teacher in a for-profit America in the age of Donald Trump. My name is Chelsea Rivera, and today we are talking with Danielle Kopp, a public school teacher at Sparta High School. Let's begin. So just as a warm-up question, what are teachers like today at Sparta High?
We've had some that are natural, just like anything. We've had some that are open to improving, which is also really, really good. We've had some who haven't made it, who they're there only a short time and you're like, this is not going to work, because they also have high standards. And so they want that in their teachers. Exactly. We've had like issues where teachers came in and they were quote unquote young, but they were like 27, which to me, I'm like, that's not young. Like that's far older like than I was when I started teaching. And so, but they would do things or say things or like, we're very sarcastic or try to be the kids' friends, things like that. And that you can have a good relationship with students without being their friend. You could be a role model, sometimes you're like a sisterly or motherly figure depending on your age and personality. But, so those are things where that needs to be remedied. And so we do, like in most schools, they have systems where if a teacher is struggling in the classroom or with students, they could end up having a plan where that they have to follow through. And if they don't improve, then they don't keep their job, right. So I mean, we have some amazing teachers that have come in, and then we've had some that struggled. But I just know that overall, from what I hear, not just in our school, but other schools, like I have a lot of friends who are teachers, who, just say like it's harder and harder to find good people coming out of college. And so there's not as many people going into it. And then the people who come out aren't always the best people that you want, to be there in your school. So
that's very true.
Danielle Kopp. I currently teach at Sparta High School, but I've been teaching in Sparta for 16 years. The first 10 years I taught at Sparta Middle School, and I taught 7th and 8th grade language arts, and then a class called Connections. And then there were some years where I taught only writing. And then after I was teaching for 10 years, our district unfortunately had a big layoff. They laid off over 70 total teachers. And so we knew that some teachers were going to have to go to the high school, and I was ready for a change, and I volunteered to go, and they let me. And so for the last 6 years, I've been at the high school. Currently, I teach 10th grade honors, British and World Literature, 12th grade college prep, contemporary literature, and Tomorrow's Teachers, which is an honors level elective, an intro to education where the kids can get college credit. That's what I'm currently teaching right now.
Amazing. And I know we've already talked about this, but
no, that's okay.
Just for the record, talk a little bit about your intro to education class.
Oh, yeah. I guess it was 4 years ago, I was asked to take a group of kids on just a field trip about education. And I had, 15 kids or so that came. And when I was there, I learned that there's this course called Tomorrow's Teachers. It's actually through the College of New Jersey. So the College of New Jersey trains us, and it's pretty much a way. It started in South Carolina, I think, and it's pretty much a way. It started as a teacher recruitment program. In South Carolina, they were finding that they just couldn't get good teachers, and so they thought if we can get into the high schools and get kids before they go to college interested in it, then maybe that would help us get more kids going to education. So eventually, somehow it came to New Jersey. I'm not exactly sure how. But I had to go get trained, and I started this course. And so pretty much I went to because for juniors and seniors, so I went to every sophomore and junior English class the year before with they have to apply for it to be in the class. I didn't mention that before. Mostly because we really want kids who are serious. We don't want kids who are like, oh, I don't care, I'm just going to take it. And so they have to fill out an application. They have to write an essay. We have denied kids based on behavior issues, GPAs that are very low. Yeah, we want to make sure they're ready for it, and there's no prerequisite. So it's that's kind of a good way to get them to learn about them. So when they're in the class, they learn about everything that teachers, like a first-year college student, would learn in an intro to education course. So we start with learning styles, the different, ways that your brain works, how we all learn differently. We go into child development from birth to 3, and then 4 to 6, and cognitive development, physical development, so psychosocial development, everything that we talk about, the big people, Gardner, Piaget, all the people you're going to learn about in college. Yeah. So it's really just kind of here's everything that you would learn at the beginning of education. And then of course we do discuss classroom management and planning lessons and actually teaching a lesson. But the best thing about the course is that we do observations in different schools. We have guest speakers, but from March to the end of May, 2 to 3 days a week instead of and we do 2 to 3 days a week because of our rotating schedule. So it has to back up to lunch so that we give up half our lunch so that we have more time, and then it backs up to the end of the day so that we could stay late. So so what's funny is that kids will go at the end of the day. I'll leave, so our day ends at 2:24, so I'll leave by 2:30, but they can stay if they want. So sometimes they'll stay till 3:30, and they're like, I just didn't want to leave the students. And so we go 2 to 3 days a week, and we actually work with kids, and I observe my students working with kids. What happened to me last year, the first year that we did it, is that the end of the year, when they were finishing up with their students in the elementary and middle schools, my high school students I was shocked. They were so upset to leave. I had kids, I didn't tell you this, they were crying, they were bringing gifts for their students. I had kids who cut school, technically signed themselves out of Sparta High School to go back to their elementary school. And my supervisor was like, you mean kids are cutting school to go to school? And I'm like, yes, because they didn't want to let them go. And what's cool about that is it's very hard to explain what it feels like to be a teacher. And so when they experienced it, I was like, this is what it's like to teach. This is why we cry at graduation. This is why we miss our students. You fall in love with them, and they get to experience that. And the hard things too. When kids are acting up or won't listen, they get to experience it. And then when they come back to class, we talk about those things and how do you deal with it and what do you do? And so they leave our class with 3 college credits. They leave with greater understanding of education. And then they decide, do I want to go into education? Do I want to pursue education in other ways, like policy? Do I want to, be a guidance counselor, be a school nurse, be an administrator? And even if they don't, as I said before, most of them will become parents, and they have a greater appreciation for education and a greater understanding of what kids are like as they grow up. Because, if you raise kids, those are things you need to know. So it's really a cool course. Last year I had 14 kids. I had 13 girls and 1 boy. And this year I have 18 students, and I have 17 girls and 1 boy. And so the 1 boy ends up being both the boys last year and this year are very, I don't think they mind it, and they're kind of on the inside of a special club all of a sudden, because the girls will start to talk about something and then kind of glance at the 1 boy and be like, oh, I don't care if you hear this, and then continue and share something that normally they wouldn't say necessarily in front of a boy. And so I'm trying to get more boys interested.
That's also another thing.
So it's hard. And some of them, I had 3 boys the first year and 2 dropped it in the first 2 days. And all of it's because we started doing work. It was a summer reading assignment, their summer reading. I mean, they have to do a presentation. It's a college level course. So as soon as we started doing work, 2 of the boys dropped the course immediately. And the 1 boy, I was like, please don't leave. And he was like, I'm going to stay, and he did stay. And now I have another boy this year who's awesome. And, it is another problem because in my own kids' elementary school this year, somebody retired, somebody went on maternity leave. they have a male teacher came to teach fourth grade, and all the kids were in awe because there's one male music teacher and there's a male phys ed teacher, but there's no male classroom teachers. And so they were like, oh my gosh, they have a boy as their teacher, and they were like all curious about it. Yeah.
It's so rare these days.
You see more men in middle school and high school because it's more content driven. But yeah, elementary schools you don't. Yeah, you still don't. So it's crazy. But yeah, it's a really fun course. So.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I'm very jealous I couldn't take
And it was nice for me too because I've taught English for so many years, and to have a class that wasn't English. And, I think about my future as a teacher. Like, I mean, from just, watching your mom too, that, I mean, I teach English. And so the hardest part about teaching English is grading the papers. Yes. It's so time consuming, but it's so important.
Right.
And I say to my husband sometimes, like, I don't know how long I can keep this up, this pace of, like, when you leave here, like today, I literally, all my sophomores handed papers in on Wednesday. And I'm trying to grade them before Christmas break. So like, I'm like, I'll stay up all night if I have to. I have to get these papers done. And so I try not to do that all the time. I try to work in school as most as I can, but it happens. And so I often think that for me, I love teaching, but I think that eventually, when I do retire, and maybe I'll be on the younger side, I don't know, that I'd love to teach people to teach. Like I'd love to teach in a college. And so having tomorrow's teachers as a class is really a cool way for even me to say, wow, this is a break from my normal teaching schedule. And it's also kind of a peek maybe into what my future could be as a teacher, So yeah, it's really been a cool experience.
You should look into the Children's Literacy Initiative.
I should. I don't know anything about it, so I would love to hear about that.
Teach other teachers how to, teach literacy better.
Yeah, that's so neat. Thank you.
So that all sounds amazing. Just going off of that, just to provide like a little context
about
Sparta High, what is the social, like political, etc., like climate of the school?
So Sparta is upper middle, upper class, families. We still, unfortunately, don't have a ton of diversity. Most kids are white. Most kids are Christian. They're fairly conservative, I think, as a whole. And so, I think over the years we have gotten some more diversity, but not nearly as what you'd see in other places. I live in Rockaway, and so my kids go to school with kids like that. We have we have a pretty big Indian population. We have a lot of kids who are Jewish. And so they're exposed to a lot more diversity just 20 minutes away.
Exactly.
Which is kind of crazy. But yeah, in Sparta, it's pretty much like, and it's also the kids will even say like, oh, everybody thinks we're all rich. Yeah. And so, of course, is everybody rich in Sparta? No, obviously not. But a lot of the kids, there are many kids who have a lot. You know what I mean? And that stands out. And so, of course, they have that reputation of being like, oh, this rich white school. And so, I think it's changing a little bit, which is nice to have some diversity, but we still are mostly, a lot of us there's a lot of the same. I mean, in the entire, I don't know if you realize this, but the entire school district of Sparta, there is not one African-American teacher. There's not one.
Now that I think of that.
Yeah, you can't think of one, right?
No,
There's not one.
That is crazy.
So we had like our Chinese teacher who taught Chinese.
Right.
And of course we have teachers of different nationalities and backgrounds, but there's not one of color.
That's insane.
Crazy.
Wow.
So that in and of itself, and so I hope that eventually we have even more diversity in the teaching staff, but I imagine it's probably harder to get people.
Right.
You know what I mean? To be the first. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
I thought of that.
Yeah. I never really thought of it either until maybe like when I was teaching tomorrow's teachers, and I was in all of the schools a lot and looking around and being like, oh my gosh.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, I gotta remember that.
Yeah.
So the next question I have is, why did you want to become a teacher?
I actually always wanted to be a teacher. I was one of those kids who played school when I was little. Like I thought it would be really cool to write on a chalkboard. When I was young, like first or second grade, I used to save all my school papers and put them in a box under my bed. And I remember my mom would say, why do you want those papers? And I would say, well, I need them for when I'm a teacher. Like I was already planning ahead. And so for me, it's kind of like in my blood. It always has been. And when I graduated from college, actually, my mom had saved that box of papers and was like, here's your papers. Of course, I ended up not teaching elementary school, which was not the plan. I actually started college as an elementary school major. Yeah, and English, so in the state of New Jersey, you have to also have a subject major, so you double major. So English was my other major, but I was elementary school, and luckily I went to a college that put us in classrooms from like the first semester. Yeah, so the first semester that I went to observe, I was in a first grade classroom, and they were super sweet, but similar to what you learn like from Tomorrow's Teachers, being in the classroom, I all of a sudden was like, oh no, I can't teach elementary school. They're touching me. Somebody has lice. Like, they're so needy. And it didn't feel like me. So I remember at the end of that experience, the teacher was like, oh, how did you like it? And I was like, it was great, but I changed my major. And she was like, oh gosh, And I said, no, I just changed it to secondary education and decided that I really wanted to focus on older kids and teaching English. And so that's kind of how I ended up where I was. Yeah, and everybody's different because, like my husband teaches math and he went to college and was like, I don't know what I want to do. I kind of like math. I guess I'll be a teacher. Or he was like, I'll be an actuary who just like, they crunch numbers, or I'll be a teacher. And he was like, so he ended up just like, yeah, I guess I'll teach. And he's very naturally good at it, but he didn't ever want to be a teacher before that. Like he didn't grow up wanting to be a teacher where I like have always wanted to be a teacher.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Wow. And it's hard to imagine doing anything else.
Seriously.
So yeah.
Sure. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, so.
Very cool. So in your opinion, what do you think makes a good teacher?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things, but honestly, I have to say that like the two biggest things that make somebody, the two most important things that make somebody a good teacher are their ability to relate to kids. And their ability, and number two is the fact that a good teacher is someone who doesn't really want to stop learning because it's continually changing. So you have to be able to love your students, good, bad, and in between, right? And figure out a way to get them interested in what you're teaching. And then you have to be open to continuing to learn. Because, I graduated from college and literally went to school to teach, and they were talking about things I had never heard of, and I had just graduated. So things in education are always changing. Policies, requirements, stuff that you have to do. And so it's not all pleasant necessarily, but if you're not willing to take it on, listen, there's teachers who are like, I refuse to use Google Classroom. I get that. Like, you don't want everything to be on the computer, but you're not going to survive if you don't adapt. And I often say, like, 10 years from now, what is school going to look like? Am I going to be teaching from my pajamas on a computer screen? Maybe. I have no idea. But you have to really be able to adapt because you never know. Every year is something different.
That is very true. I agree. So these two questions are kind of similar.
Okay.
So how/by whom is curriculum developed? And in your classroom, what is the mechanism for assessing student learning?
Okay. So in our district, they've done different things. Like typically if we need to write curriculum, there's a group of teachers who get together. If we're writing it from let's say we're doing 9 through 12 English, we meet with the 8th grade teachers so we know what they're doing, and then we kind of build up. So when they rewrite curriculum, they look at the entire picture, kindergarten through 12th grade English. What are the skills they need to do? Everything's skills-based now. Years ago, it used to be like, oh, which themes are we going to do, or which novels? Now that's all secondary. It's like, which skills do they need to learn, and then what materials do we need to help them learn those skills? And so typically the teachers meet, if it's a curriculum writing year, sometimes they'll give us a half day here, a half day there. Sometimes they'll pay us to work on it over the summer, like an hourly rate or something. And then we put it together, and then if it needs to be tweaked, we do that. It has to be approved by the Board of Education before it becomes something that we're teaching. The one good thing about teaching is we do have the ability to add things or change things, in our classrooms. Yeah, we're not following a script, but if we know they need to learn these skills, here's 5 different books that meet that, here's different activities, and we pull from that. But then, of course, each of us in our own classrooms, pick and choose what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. If you're adding something small, that's fine. If you're adding like a whole unit, you're supposed to still get it approved by the Board of Education before you teach it. Because if ever a parent turns around and says, why are we doing this? If it's not approved, that's not really good. You find yourself in a bad position. And then as far as student assessment, again, I think everyone does that differently. I have been through a period over the last couple of years of like really evaluating my student assessment, because one day I was just kind of like, why am I giving them this quiz? What is the purpose of this? Why am I asking them these questions? Yeah, and so, I mean, so for me, I do still give like some common assessments that have some multiple choice questions and open answer, mostly because that's what they see on standardized tests. I don't practice for standardized tests. I don't teach to a test at all, but I don't want them to sit down to a test and be like, I've never seen a question like this. I'd rather them have seen it here and there. So I do that, but most of my assessment is through, I teach English. So a lot of it is through writing. It's through different projects. Like my kids write a blog. They, every month they're required to write at least once. They, do podcasts in my memoir unit. When I teach the Canterbury Tales, they like reenact one of them for their class, whether it's through video or through something creative, so they are exposed to more of the tales than we can read in class. My kids, I just use a program called Flipgrid, which is really kind of cool. And my students right now are doing book chats on them about independent books they've read. I like try to, so I've changed my assessment. Are there a lot of classes where they take notes and take tests? Yes. But from my perspective, I was kind of like, and I never really did that. Like I was never that kind of teacher. And my subject doesn't really lend to that necessarily, but I'm like more like, what is real? Like, what do they need to be doing? What is going to help them? So every unit it's different, but I have a variety of ways to assess them. I also assess them a lot through, conversations and meeting one-on-one with them. Like I guess it was 3 years ago, I changed my format. So I have days that I teach like whole class, whether it's discussion or maybe it's a lecture. Sometimes it has to be, maybe it's working together. And then they have independent work days where they can work on anything that's due. So I give them like all their assignments at the beginning of the unit. They're due in like 3 weeks to a month. But that allows me to meet with them. So then I can sit with you and say, okay, this is your intro. You're struggling. Because guess what? The kid at the next table, he might not be struggling with that. He doesn't need to listen to me teach it again at the high school level, especially the honors level. So I sit individually with kids every independent work day and work with them. They can ask me questions. I can go over things. I can work in a small group. And then on Fridays we read, which is new. And I was like nervous about starting that, but they love it. And I want them to love reading. I mean, so many high schoolers are like, I used to read and now I don't. And so letting them choose books and talking about books and giving them the time. And they love it. So we like sit back, we read, and they're books that we're using in our class. So it's not, it's not time wasted. It's really like, reading is how they improve their vocabulary. It's how they improve their writing. It's how everything. And so, they need it. So so that's kind of the way that I assess. It's always different.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I know when I went to high school, we were going through that period of like SGOs and all that stuff. So you have never really like abandoned like creativity. Yeah. Even through
I can't.
That's amazing.
Well, and so what's hard is I'm lucky because I teach English. It's far harder to be creative in other subjects. Like, so my husband, for example, teaches math. And so I'll come home and say, did you know so-and-so's mom like took them to Guatemala to see the, whatever. And he's like, how do you know that? And I'm like, because I teach English. And so teaching literature lends to talking about our lives. And so where and being creative and doing things like that, where he certainly has all different things that he does that are creative, but it's much harder to incorporate some of that. But no, I couldn't let it go. Like, and if somebody said like, oh, and listen, every year, like, so after Christmas break, we're doing the Canterbury Tales. And every year I go, do I have them do the creative presentation? I don't know. Is it like too elementary? Mm-hmm. But guess what happens? They love it. They make videos. They talk about it. They come back. Do you remember when we made that video? Like, are you showing it to other students? And I'm like, how do I say no to it? It's, they're learning and they're teaching others. And like, so how do I say no to something they love? Even though sometimes I question it because of everything around me. The same thing with the independent reading. I wanted to do it. My supervisor was totally behind me. And then August, right before school started, I was like, maybe I shouldn't do it. People are going to judge. What are parents going to say? And then, she was like, just give it a try. And then when I did it, kids were like, I haven't read this much since I was a little kid. And I love it now. I can't wait to go home and read this book. And parents were emailing me saying, my son spent the whole weekend reading a book. Like, what did you do? And I'm like, nothing. I gave him choice and I gave him time. And I reminded them that they love to read, you know? And so then it's like, then I feel validated after that.
Yes.
Even with the blog, it's like, oh, the blog, like it's creative.
Right.
They could write about something we did in class. They could write a short story. They could write a poem. Why am I having to do it? And it's like, then I had a kid just the other day, a senior who I had 2 years ago, like send me a letter for Thanksgiving saying like, the blog was one of the best things. It broke me out of my shell. I used my blog post for some of my college essays. And it's like, okay, and it's one kid out of how many, but it still like lets me know like, okay, it like it's important.
Exactly.
And so it like allows me to continue to do some of those creative things where if I look around me, sometimes I'm nervous because maybe other people aren't doing those things. But you want to know something? I also like, you know, Dr. Hire across the hall, and he's more like, you know, a lecturer. Well, guess what? His kids read on Fridays now. And he has tables in his room.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And you want to know why? Because I bugged him. I like literally like, you know, like poking him in the side going, try it, John, try it, John, try it. And he was like, all right, I'll try it. And then like, oh, Danielle, you have tables in your room? Like, John, don't you want tables? Don't you want to try this? And he's like, he still has his podium, you know.
You won't ever get rid of it.
But you know what I mean? And he's like, all right. Like, I'll give it a try. And then they're like, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. And so I think that we help each other because, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like if I looked around and said, okay, I need to follow these standards or my SGO or whatever, like I'm going to give up these things that I love. Well, then it would impact me negatively, my students, and then the other teachers who might be saying, well, if she's going to do it, maybe I'll try it, you know? And I do the same, like they're doing Harkness method a lot, which is like different ways kids like do their own research and then they run class discussions. And like, I hadn't done that. So I go and observe one of my colleagues and I'm like, maybe I should give it a try, you know? It's like the next step from like the Socratic seminar, you know? But that's how we keep the creativity going, really. Yeah.
So like teachers are always influencing other teachers.
Yeah, we have to.
That's great.
Yeah.
Crazy.
They always say in education, you can't reinvent the wheel, right? Like you have to beg, borrow, and steal.
Right.
So you come up with things on your own, you take other people's items and you make them your own. So yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for that.
No, absolutely.
My first question is, of all elements of teaching today, what are you most frustrated by?
I think that I've always felt most frustrated by the fact that teaching is a business, which I didn't really know when I was in school to become a teacher. And then you get there and it's like, well, no, you have to do this or you need to fill this out. It has. And you're like, wait, why? And it's like, well, because so-and-so wants it. And I'm like, well, who, you know, that's not the best thing for the kids, but it's a business or somebody knows somebody with one of the publishing companies. You know what I mean? And so like that I think is frustrating to me. And yeah, there's a lot of things as a teacher you have to do that feel frustrating. Like something small, like I have lunch duty. And I stand there, and it's only once every cycle, you know, because we rotate. But I stand there, and I'm like angry because I have so much to do. Yes. And I'm like, I literally have students coming up to me with their computers in the cafeteria. I know you're on duty, but can you help me with this paper? And I'm like, I should be in my classroom helping them because you know, in our high school we help students virtually every day.
Exactly.
We don't sit down and eat lunch together. We never have. In the middle school we did. We'd all like sit in the room and we'd eat. But the kids aren't free to wander around. We're in the high school, they can come upstairs if they have to, or they can come to the classrooms. And so they show up. I need to make up a test. Can I study in here? Can I talk to you about a personal thing? Like, and so when I'm on lunch duty, I'm angry that I'm not doing other things that I could be doing. But then there's things like you said, like an SGO. You know, it's like it feels like they want us to evaluate students within the first few weeks of school and come up with a plan, but it's not enough time to know them. So we essentially kind of like just choose, like it's almost random. And then at the end of the year, you don't know if you're going to make it or not. And so like there are people who have worked around the system. I would guarantee and bet everything I have that there are people who lie. And just like throw in whatever numbers so that it helps them. There are teachers who have failed their SGO, even though they're amazing teachers. And so that feels like unfortunate, you know, like and frustrating. And so there's that kind of stuff that's frustrating because you want to put your efforts towards your students. And it's like, really, I have to spend this time doing this, or I have to give them something that doesn't count for them, or I have to, you know, make up something just to have it done. And so that's definitely difficult, but I would say that's frustrating. And, you know, in more recent years, things have changed I think the way parents view school and education has changed, which sometimes poses problems.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, like when I was a kid, if a teacher called the house, it was like, what did you do?
Yeah.
And still some parents are like that, but then there's other parents who immediately are like, well, you must have done something to my kid.
Right.
So students are different, parents are different, technology's changed things.
Yes.
So 16 years ago when I started teaching, students were very different than they are now.
Yeah, for sure.
And we can't
For sure.
change that. That's just the evolution of the child. Yeah, we have to adapt. Sometimes it's harder than others, but
That's very true.
yeah.
That is very true. And were you more frustrated when Governor Chris Christie was in office? And then has it gotten better now that he's
I don't know if it's gotten better yet
Yeah.
because it's pretty recent.
Yeah.
But I would say that maybe it feels better because I got used to it. So before when I was you start teaching, it was like, oh, you're a teacher. That's so great. Like you've dedicated your life. Oh, I loved my teacher. And then all of a sudden, because he really like publicly demonized teachers in so many ways, saying like, we hardly worked, we were lazy, we wanted, and it's like, wait a minute. First of all, we're highly educated. I have a master's degree plus 75 graduate credits on top of it. Because that's what our guide is. And so like I want to try to make as much money as I can, of course. Like I don't make more money for being a good teacher.
Right.
I was Sparta Township's Teacher of the Year twice. The year that I had Braden in 2010 and then in 2015. And so like, but that doesn't, like, they don't give you anything for that, you don't get like a raise because you're good. And so you go to school, you try to get more credit to make a little more money because you want to live a decent life. We're never going to be millionaires, but like he demonized teachers in such a way that it went from people being like, oh, you're a teacher, that's great, to like being like, oh, of course you get the summer off. Like, oh, it must be nice. And it's like, well, I don't get paid over the summer.
Right.
I save money every month, and all the extracurricular things that I do, that money goes so we can stay home in the summer.
Yes.
Because honestly, like you could get a little job in the summer, but it's almost not worth your time. It's like, wait, you want me to work 40 hours a week for $2,000 for the 2 months? Like, I'd rather be with my children, And so my husband and I, like, he runs academic club. I run Key Club. I run National Honor Society. We save money every month in order to be able to make our bills and everything over the summer. And then at the end of the summer, we start over. And even recently, someone said, Danielle, you do so much. Why don't you give up NHS? And I was like, I can. It's only like a couple $1,000s, but now I need it.
Exactly.
And so maybe a few years from now, maybe when the kids are a little older, like who knows? And I'm not opposed to doing something in the summer of, a few days a week or whatever.
Right.
But there's not a lot out there that's worth it.
That is very true.
And so, yeah, Chris Christie changed the atmosphere where, like, I remember when I had my second child, I was at a family, holiday. Mm-hmm. And I said something like how I wasn't going back to work so she was born in November, and I wasn't going back to work until the next September. Right. When I had my first child, I went back to work and he was only 3 months old. Right. And so this time we had like prepared a little bit more financially, and I was gonna stay home with them until she was almost a year. And I had an uncle who was like, oh, well, that's like, I think he said something like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, oh, like blah, 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 blah. Like insinuating that I was like stealing from taxpayers because I had a maternity leave. And I was kind of like, but your wife had a maternity leave and I don't get paid. And I didn't get my health insurance. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that. But he thought, just based on media, that I was going on a paid maternity leave and he was paying for it through his tax dollars. And I was like, no, like I get no paycheck and no health insurance. Like I don't get, and I'm not contributing, I don't get anything. I'm just home with my kids. They just say that I can come back, right? Like I deserve that time with my kids too. And so it definitely changed. And I think one of the worst changes, so teachers who were already in it and went through the Christie administration, you're full of frustration, you're upset. Yes. You feel demonized. You watch the television. You think, oh my gosh, like, why is he saying that about us? I work. I give everything. I mean, I was your teacher. I taught your sisters. Like, I worked in the clubs. Like, I would, like, cut off my arm for you guys. Like, I would have done anything for my students. And, like, here he is saying, like, I'm being greedy. And I know he's not talking specifically about me, but it's just, so he changed, like, the reputation. And then another side effect of that is that people don't want to go into it. Or people who are teachers, they tell their own kids, don't go into it. They tell their students, don't go into it.
I've heard,
You know, they say, "Oh, Mom, I want to be a teacher," and the teachers are like,
Don't do it.
"Do something else."
That's true.
Why you like? And it's like, how terrible is that? Because we need good teachers, you know. And so, and I have to be honest with you, that even though my husband and I are teachers, like when our own children, because it's what they know, say, "I want to be a teacher when I grow up." For a minute, we go.
My mom has done the same.
Yeah. Even though we're great teachers and we know it's important, and I'm teaching a class for kids who want to be teachers, I still like, oh God, are you sure that's what you want to do? Because you really do work a lot and you work really hard and you dedicate yourself and yeah, we make a decent living, but we don't make as much as people who are probably have less education than we do. But it's a choice that we made, you know, but yeah, he definitely changed things and he made those few years were hard. They were hard because everyone was talking about education, everyone was talking about teachers, and it was always the teacher's fault. Mm-hmm. Terrible things happening in schools. Oh, why didn't the teachers? Oh, that kid's strange, and he brought a gun to school. Why didn't the teachers say something? Yeah, exactly. And it's like, we can't start calling out kids who are strange. Like, have you been in a middle school? Every kid is strange. Every single one. That's the age. You know what I mean? And so like, but that's what started happening on every level from like, why are you teaching this? And oh, you're pushing an agenda. And it's like, wait a minute. I don't have an agenda. Like, I've wanted to do this my whole life. Right. And listen, are there people who might have some of those things? Yes. Sure. Like, just like there's bad lawyers and bad police officers and, I mean, bad doctors. Like, there's also bad teachers. Yes. But to demonize, like, everybody as a whole, it definitely changed. And you know what? It changes morale. You go to school and everybody's upset and everyone feels bad. And then you start to give up. And say, well, what am I doing this for? Why am I working so hard? Why am I staying late? Why am I going to the concerts? Why am I writing emails to parents if everybody's going to think that I'm not even worth, you know, anything? Right. And so he definitely did that. And I do hope, and like I said, I don't think it's changed, but I think we've gotten used to it where we've learned to deal with it. But I do hope that it does change now so that more people become interested in teaching and so that new teachers don't quit. Like, I think there's a statistic that most new teachers quit like before 5 years and they leave and they go do something else, you know? And so you don't want that to happen either because again, we need good teachers. So
right. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So from what you've told me about like Shells and Parker, they want to, you know, kind of climb that ladder.
Yeah.
Is that because, you know, like, is it because of Governor Chris Christie, or is it in his policies, or is it because of like?
I don't know that it's because of like. I think that when people leave to go into administration, it's for a variety of reasons. Yeah. You make more money, so sometimes it's driven by that. Right. You know, it also teaching is exhausting, and not that being an administrator isn't exhausting or a counselor or whatever. It's different. Yes. You know, like Mrs. Valou became a guidance counselor. Like, you know, so we've had a lot of teachers go on to do other positions, and I think that teaching is exhausting and that you get tired. Mm-hmm. You know, like I jokingly like said to my husband, like, I don't know if I can do this. Maybe I have 10 more years in me. He was like, Danielle, you're in your 30s. Like, what are you talking about? You can't stop working in your 40s. And I'm like, but physically, like, and emotionally and mentally, sometimes that's how you feel. Like you hit that point where you're like, how much longer can I work this much at this pace? And deal with everything else. And so I think that a lot of people go into administration either because it's something they've always wanted to do, they want to make more money, or they just make it, they just think like they need a change. I see. Okay. And they need something different. So I don't know that it's like a policy thing. Like, I'm sure there's people who try to leave, but I think if people had issues with like the policy or the way Christie treated teachers, like they would just leave altogether versus staying in education. You know, so I know that like there's a lot of teachers who teach for 5, 6, 7 years and then are like, well, maybe I could be a VP, or maybe I don't want to deal with kids in this way, or maybe I can't grade any more papers, you know, and they move on to things. But I think each position has its own set of positives and negatives, you know, so like I would hate to leave the classroom and be in a position where I'm not with students. So like even like Miss DeLucia, who went to the media center, another example, she was like, I'm kind of like, I want something different. She went and got her library science degree. And so for the first few years, her students were still in the school. So they came in, they chatted. Well, now she doesn't know any of the kids because they've all graduated. And so now she's like dealing with like kids being messy at lunch in there, or kids like not doing what they should. And now she's like itching. She also interviewed for the VP position. She's itching for a change because she's like, I'm just I feel like I'm babysitting these kids at lunch. I'm not like loving it. I don't have that connection with students anymore. And that's one of the best parts of teaching. Yeah, it is. And so even like Mr. Schultz had said that when he came and spoke to my Tomorrow's Teachers class a few weeks ago, his last day actually. But he said that as a teacher, like he knew people, but then when he was just a supervisor, the kids would like walk along and be like, who's that guy? Yeah, because they don't know. And so like they don't know who he is. And he's like, as a VP, he felt like he got some of that back with the students. Even if they weren't in his office for trouble, like he would see them in the hall, he'd say hello. He's like, but then you deal with a lot of other issues that are wearing. And so he just like, he's still trying to, I think, find his way. So I think there's a lot of reasons why people, and you know what, there's also some people who feel like, oh, I'm going to just be a teacher my whole career. Like, which I think is kind of, I don't agree with that, but there's some people who feel like, well, if I don't move on, then I'm just like, am I being stagnant? And for me, when I felt stagnant was when I went to the high school and then I taught different courses. You know what I mean? So like, it's like, oh, I taught this, and then I taught the honors level, and then I took on Tomorrow's Teachers, and maybe next year I'll teach creative writing. And so that's where I get like my like fire from, is like still teaching but changing. Right. Not always doing the same thing necessarily. Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. A couple of the issues I wanted to hear your thoughts on were Chris Christie's merit pay salary, pension and healthcare cuts, privatization in the classroom, and the use of technology in curriculum. So what are your thoughts on those kind of issues? I know there are a lot, but...
So merit pay is tricky because it's a test. Yes. And some kids are amazing and great students, but they can't take tests well. Or they're sick, or or they have a hard day. Yes. It reminds me of a story. When I was teaching 8th grade, we gave the 8th grade GEPA. I think it was called the GEPA. So okay. Yeah. And so the 8th graders had to take it. So I had a kid. So I don't know if you know this, but like technically as teachers, we're not supposed to look at the test at all. Like even now when they take the park, if we're supposed to walk around and make sure like they're on the right page, like if it was a paper, or make sure for park that they're in the right section, but we're not supposed to look at the questions. We can like get in trouble for that. Wow. And so I had a kid, an 8th grader, who finished his essay, which they had like an hour to do, in like 4 minutes. So I'm like, I need to see what he did. So I opened his text booklet, and he was a very smart kid. Okay. And he wrote, "This is dumb, so I'm going to draw a whale." And across the entire 2 pages of lined paper was a huge whale. And that's what he did. And so that is an example of why merit pay, when you're dealing with kids, is not a good idea. Because he was a super bright kid. He improved a ton in my class, but he didn't want to take a test, so he drew a whale. And now that's going to affect me. And then what about a kid who really doesn't care about school and maybe hates a teacher? You know what I'm saying? And so you can't rely on that, because it doesn't always, and then even on the flip side, so I teach the highest level kids in the entire high school. They always perform better than others. Not only because of me, because of their teacher freshman year and 8th grade and everything their parents have done to help them become really good students. And so I'm going to get paid more because I happen to teach the kids who are the smartest. Exactly. You know what I'm saying? So there's really a lot wrong with that. As far as like pension cuts and stuff, sadly, I don't really I don't think about it too much yet, because so whenever I go to get my taxes done, I'm always like, oh, we're not saving enough for retirement. And like my accountant will be like, well, you guys will have a pension. I'm like, I don't know if we will. I don't know if we will. And we pay into it. Right. So it's like we pay into it. And so part of me is like, if it's not going to exist, then just let me keep my money now instead of having to pay into it. And if I'm paying into it, I hope it's there, because what am I, so that's like nerve-wracking. But to be honest, the way I deal with it is to just not deal with it. Because I am still young and I still have a lot of years and I can't predict what's going to happen. So rather than stress, we just do the best we can, save what we can, and cross our fingers. And so you hate to think about cuts for something that people have put money into for all this time that they're relying on. So that is nerve-wracking. What were the other 2 things that you had said?
Privatization in the classroom. So my professor did a study on Pearson.
Yeah.
It has a lot of hands in everything.
Sure, it does.
So do you have like an example of that? of, if not, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that we certainly have like, obviously we use like certain companies and things like that. I think privatization is scary because then it takes away, it is, because then like what they could do anything that they want. And I mean, you could end up in a good place or not.
Right.
And so again, it brings me back to the point of it, like it's not supposed to be a business.
Exactly.
Necessarily, like we're not here to like make somebody else money. If you have a great textbook, fine. Like if you have, resources that we maybe buy, that's great. We're also at a point where we don't use textbooks like we used to because everything is online. And some of them are paid things that we have online.
Right.
But I think it's scary to think because and especially if it gets to a point where maybe schools are privatized and people pay tuition, like then you separate the classes.
Yes.
Like, so your family has money, so you get the best education, whereas somebody else who's really a great student and deserves that opportunity, their family doesn't, and so they get stuck with whatever's left, where like if that happens, they're going to pay for the best teachers. It's going to be hard, you know what I mean? And so the good thing about public school is that everybody has an opportunity.
Yes.
And is every public school great? No. Where I teach, we're really good. And so every kid that walks through people buy homes in the town because of the schools.
Exactly.
I mean, that's always happened. Yeah. And people move there saying, I've heard this about that school. I want to make sure that I'm there. And so I think that it's a really scary idea. I hope it doesn't get to that point. And then as far as technology, I think technology is just like anything. It's a tool. It has positive points and negative points. It's changed our lives in so many ways. But it's like, I can put something on, like, so for example, I can record a video of myself going through a slideshow and I can post it on Google Classroom and kids can watch it at their leisure or rewind it, take notes on it, rather than doing it during class, kind of like a flipped classroom type of situation. But at the same time, there's kids in class who are trying to play games. And now we have something called Go Guardian, which is like we can see their computer screens. So I can show it to you if you want to. They I have all these little boxes and it's all their computer screens. So like if you're a student in my class and you're supposed to be taking a quiz and I see a box pop up, I can click and it'll make it bigger and I can see if you're looking up an answer. It's kind of creepy. And it actually, we're only supposed to do it when they're in the classroom, of course.
Exactly.
But they have their Chromebooks from the school and they use them at home and you can log in anytime. So like someone could log in, or if I have a kid who's out sick, if I log in for my class, I'll be like, wait, like why is Tommy on Netflix? And I'm like, oh, he's not here, because I can see his screen. And so the kids are like, they feel like, are we violated? Are we this? But then we also have to keep tabs on the technology because you can't just give a kid, you can't see what they're doing all the time and they could be doing nothing.
I've never heard of that before. That is
crazy. We got that. I think last year was the first year we had it. It's called Go Guardian.
Things have changed so much.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I don't use it every day, but if I give a test or a quiz that's online, I use it.
Right.
If they're supposed to be working on something specific, I'll throw it on there.
Yeah.
Just like so I can keep them on track and be like, like Nick, make sure you're doing this, like, or, something like that. But yeah, so I mean, technology has changed the way we do things in a huge way. A lot of it positive, some of it negative. Yeah. Then there's concerns like, should they be staring at a screen all day? Like, is it too much? And then the idea that if you don't use it, there are kids who feel like they're bored or it's not fun because they're used to using it. And that's just another thing like that we have to, kind of deal with. So
very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so these next two questions are out of the classroom questions. So do you have any thoughts on the I know this happened kind of in the past, but on the national wave of teacher resistance movements? There were all these big, huge teacher resistance movements and protests across the country.
Right.
And it kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a fail. I don't know.
Yeah. They just dissipated, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess that's kind of one of those things where, you see that and you just for us, we would kind of watch and then just walk away.
Did Sparta have a movement after the couple layoffs that happened, that big wave of
I don't think that I wouldn't call anything like a movement, you know. We had like that year there was like a huge budget issue, which caused like this huge like layoff period. But like I think, you know, it's interesting because like, so you mean the teachers resisting? Is that what okay? Yes. I'm like thinking like to myself, like, are people resisting teachers? Like, I don't, yeah. So I think that like anytime there's something going on, like we protest, we march, like, and it's supposed to be peaceful. You hold up signs. Like even right now, we don't have a contract. Which it happens every few years, but now it's like, okay, we're going to end up working the whole year without a contract. We could end up working 2 years without a contract, so you get no raises, no movement on the guide. Like, you don't get so then eventually they start to say like, well, don't leave school right on time. Don't give up your lunch for students. And that's hard for me because it's like, I get it. It's extra time that we're not contracted to work, but it feels unfair to the people that we care about, you know? And so that's definitely like, I think a tricky thing for us as teachers. So we don't have any big, like, not that I can remember, but there have been times where we like would all like wear the same color t-shirt and like stand outside, you know, like when parents are dropping off to show that like we're united and things like that. Some schools, we haven't done this, but some schools have done a walkout with like, we're going to just leave. Like if we don't have a contract, we're going to leave. And then what's going to happen? At our school, oftentimes, we don't seem to, we as a association like Sparta I guess it's the SCA, Sparta Education Association, we try really hard not to do things that are going to affect our students because that's why we're there. So like, sure, we can all wear a red t-shirt and go teach all day so people know like we're upset or that we think that things should be different, but we don't want to walk out of school. I mean, we don't want to, I don't know if you remember, it was the year that I was pregnant with Quinn. They canceled that same year of all the layoffs. They canceled all the clubs. They wouldn't give us stipends for the clubs anymore. And I had done Builders Club for all those years. And I was so upset. And I was like crying and like, but we volunteer and it's so important for kids. This is when they learn. And I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. And like, my husband was like, Danielle, you know that you can't because then it sets a precedent that you'll do it without getting paid. And so they cut our stipends for the whole year. There were no clubs. There was no play. There was nothing because anything that teachers got paid to do, they cut. That was the year that kids had to pay to play sports. It was like $350, to play a sport. And then the next year it came back, but it was so heartbreaking because there was a whole year where kids had no activities, no clubs, because they didn't pay our stipends. And like, every teacher was like, I'll just do it. But it's like, no, we need to get compensated or else they'll never compensate us again. So we haven't had any huge movements, like in our district, but we do small things when we need to. But now that you said that, I do remember seeing across the country teachers like same idea, picketing, signs, wearing the t-shirts, walking out. I wish I could remember where it was. Somewhere in the Midwest, there were teachers who walked out, but they collected food and they worked in like a low income district and they made like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and had like juice boxes because those kids relied on school for lunch. So they still went to school and they used their own money and resources to give they could come and give lunch. So the teachers were like, I'm going to walk out because I need a contract, but I'm not going to leave my kids starving. So I'll spend my own money to make sure they have lunch, but I'm not going to be in here teaching. And so like there's been movements like that and you see that and you think, oh, I mean, we've never been in the position to have to do that. But you see that and you say like, okay, Christy, like this is what teachers are, right? They only want to make like a fair salary. They only want to be able to go do their job. Like, but if they have to do something like a movement, they make sure that their students are taken care of. Like there's tons of schools, even like locally where over Christmas break, and this isn't contractual, just in general, where they collect food and they give it to kids who rely on school for food because they know like over Christmas break they might not be food for them, and so at least they have it to bring home. So
wow.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of backlash from the public about
oh
teachers,
yeah,
you know.
oh, we're whiny, right?
Yeah.
We're complaining,
Exactly.
like what's wrong with us? We only work 7 hours a day or whatever,
exactly.
you know, only work 10 months a year, like. And so again, that I don't feel like that happened prior to the Christie administration, at least not in my memory. I don't know if it happened when I was a kid and I didn't know. But it was really, that was when that happened. And yeah, so the teachers are doing job actions, which other people might do in other, unions, right? We have a union. So like we've seen job actions of like plumbers and electricians and things like that, where same thing, they want a contract, they want to get paid fairly. But when we do it, it's like, oh, they're whining, they're complaining. What more do they want? Exactly. They live this easy life. Exactly. They make so much money and they hardly do anything. And so I often, when people think that way, I think if you could just spend a week, like just for 1 week, like do my job, a lot of them couldn't do it, and then they would realize, oh my gosh, this is so much harder. And even my students, like in Tomorrow's Teachers, will say when they've had to teach a lesson, like, I didn't realize how much went into planning a lesson. I didn't know how hard it was to keep 25 kids looking at me at the same time. I didn't realize how nerve-wracking it is. And so they do they start to realize, but yeah, it was definitely looked down upon. And of course, even like my own dad would sometimes be like, oh, well, why are they doing that? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Dad, like seriously? Like 3 of your kids are teachers. Like, how do you sit there and say that? Like, what are you, out of your mind, And so like, sure, there's things that like, people felt like should be changed or whatnot. Like paying for healthcare. Right. Like when I started teaching, it just was what it was. Like, I didn't do anything. Like, it wasn't my fault that it was the way that it was. That's how it was. And so sure, should we contribute to healthcare? Sure. We now pay like 30% of our salary or something absurd that goes to healthcare. And so it's like, all right, like at what point does, but the difference is like, we don't work in a business where we don't get a bonus, right? We don't get somebody who matches our 401k. We don't get, there's things that we don't get. And so that was supposedly years ago, the compensation for not having these other things was the healthcare. Right. And so now that's changed. And so, there's always these changes and who knows where it'll go. I don't think it'll go away, to be honest, now that it's here. But yeah, that's what those job actions were for, to say like and that's the same thing. Like I used to always say that I didn't care about tenure. Like, who cares about tenure? Like, I teach my butt off every day. And if you don't want me to teach in your school, then I won't. I'll teach somewhere else. But like my husband always remind me, but it came into play because they would fire teachers because they were pregnant, or they would fire teachers because they didn't like them, or they would fire teachers for reasons that were not good reasons. And so as a union, like this was something that they worked hard for. And so that's why we now have it, And so there's all different, and this was way before I was a teacher, but there's always things that are changing. And a lot of it is done. And a lot of those changes, positive changes, have been made because of teachers taking action or writing letters or making phone calls or job actions. So as much as we might not want to do them and certainly don't want to be judged for doing them, sometimes that's the only way to make change happen. Look at anything that people protest, or try to make a stand or make their voice known.
For sure.
Yeah.
That is very, very true. Very interesting. Very interesting. I have one more question.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Have you ever heard of the NPR Story Project?
Oh my gosh. So we started to do some kind of story thing at school a few years ago, and I don't know if it was related to NPR or not. But tell me about it.
So NPR it's kind of like The Moth.
Yes, I love The Moth.
Love The Moth too.
Yeah.
It's kind of like The Moth, but they have they publish books
on
different people's stories.
Yeah.
Like stories on anything.
Right.
So my question is to you, what is your teaching story? And if the world could hear one story that defines what it is to be a teacher in NJ Public Schools, or perhaps as teacher as a whole, what would it be? And think hardship, inspiration, pain, resilience, call for social justice, call for reform. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's just like such a huge question because I can tell 1,000 stories.
Yes.
So you mean my personal teaching story, like a story that I've been through?
Yes. I know.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, I should have given you this hour to think over.
I know there's just so many things. I'm trying to think of maybe the biggest one or the one that would be. There's I could tell you stories about like a boy that I had my very first year teaching when I was just 22, and this boy who said nothing ever. He never said anything. He didn't do his work. He was a special education student. He struggled. And then one time I had them do a speech. And it was like, I was like, great, like, he's never going to do it. And he got up there and he spoke for like 5 straight minutes about NASCAR. And I couldn't believe, and I had a special ed teacher in my room. We both sat there with like our mouths hanging open, like, how could this be? You know, how could this be true? And he just like, this was his thing, you know, this was a moment where he loved the topic, and he got up there and that like changed everything for him. And so I think that a teaching moment like that, like showing that you give kids opportunity. I remember a kid who I taught in middle school, and then I taught in high school because, you know, I had those overlap years of the same students. And he came to me once and he said, you know, I remember I went to a meeting with his parents in the middle school. And as soon as we sat down, his dad looked at him and was like, you know, why are you doing this? And why are you doing that? And I could watch him physically like shrinking. And I remember at that moment saying, oh my gosh, like, his issues are greater than anything I see in the classroom, that he obviously has a father who is like demeaning him, maybe often.
Right.
And so he got through 8th grade, and like we went through the meeting, and like every teacher was like, well, he does this and he talks back and he refuses to do his work. And of course they get to me, and I've always known for being a little bit overly positive. And I'm like, he's really great. Like, like he participates, you know, and everybody else is like scowling at me. And then when I had him in the high school, he said to me, he was like, no, of course he had matured, like he's a couple years older, he's understands himself more, he was a much better student. And he said to me, Mrs. Kopp, you were like the only adult that I knew who believed in me. Like, you were the only one who believed in me. And thank you, because like, I don't know if I would have gotten through. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, you know, like, I didn't even do anything. You know, he was I was kind to him. I said, hey, I like your shirt, you know, and tried to make a connection with this like skateboarder middle schooler. And he remembered it, you know. I had a student, my first year teaching, who had a terrible home life, abuse and all kinds of issues. And she would come during lunch a lot and like sit with me. And she had me and my husband. We were on the same team. I don't know if you knew that. When we met, we worked on the same team across the hall from each other. And so she had us together. And she would leave me notes, like, and I still have them. Actually, they're at school now, but she would leave me notes, like cards, like and write, like, you know, if you ever need to get back at Mr. Kopp, he keeps spare change in his top drawer, like stuff like that. When we went on the Washington D.C. trip, she didn't realize that there was a night that we dressed up like how to dance. Right. And so of course in 8th grade the kids are adult, some of them, especially the girls, are already like adult size. So I gave her a skirt, and another teacher that was there gave her a shirt, and we were like, we can wear whatever, like it doesn't matter what we look like. And you know, then like her parents never picked her up after the trip. Like they never picked her up. And you know, your kid's gone 3 days, it's 10 o'clock at night, they're not there. We're not supposed to drive kids anywhere. We call and call. Nobody is answering the phone. So finally another teacher is like, I'm driving her home. Like, I'm not bringing her to the police station. Like, I'm driving her home. Drives her home, makes sure she gets in. Her parents are like kind of rude. Luckily, when this student was in high school, another family of a friend took her in, and she's still like, she's married now, but she's still like their daughter, like, and she separated from her own family. But every year for many years, she called or texted me on Mother's Day. I could cry. And she was just like, again, I was so young, you know, I was only 9 years older than her, but she was like, I don't know if I would have literally survived my life without all of you guys, my teachers who were super young. I was 22, Mr. Kopp was 25, like my other friend Tara was 22. And she's like, I don't know if I would have survived without knowing that every day I could come to school and be with you guys. And so again, like there's so many stories, and they're like of kids who have had hardships that you didn't even know you were affecting them. Another story that I love, and this story hasn't totally come to fruition yet, but I had a student who I taught in 7th grade English, and she was this cute little thing and sweet as you can be, you know, and she went to high school and I didn't see her again. Yeah. And 2 years ago, my neighbor was like, oh, my son has a new English teacher at Copeland Middle School in Rockaway, where we live, Miss Barkowy. And I'm like, do you know if her first name is Suzanne? And she's like, it is. And I'm like, I taught Suzanne Barkowy when she was in 7th grade. And so I emailed her. I looked her email up, and I was like, Suzanne Barkowy, you are teaching 7th grade English. Like, I taught you in 7th grade. And she was like, I know, like, you're the reason why I'm doing this. And now in 1 year, less than a year, my son will be in that school, and there's a good chance that she will teach him English in middle school. So you want to talk about coming full circle, right? So I was this young teacher with this girl who like was inspired by something I did or said once, who then became a 7th grade English teacher, who now is a very good chance will teach my child, you know? And so when you talk about teaching stories, like I have a million stories, and some have happy endings, some don't. I mean, I have a student who I taught him senior year, and he didn't do a summer reading. Academic level, low level English class, and I said, really? You didn't do your summer reading? And he was like, oh, well, I was in rehab. And I was like, oh,
Are you serious?
I didn't know. I found out that he had gone to rehab the summer after 8th grade, and then he had gone to rehab the summer before senior year. And then he left school. Every day I was scared. Every day I was scared that I was going to find out he was gone. Every day. And the day, it was best for him to be in school because then we could watch him, you know.
Right.
And when he, halfway through senior year, he again like relapsed and he left. And he went into like a special place, like where he was living. Then he was in the special program. And about a year and a half to 2 years maybe after he graduated, he showed up like in school. And I was like, I looked at him and the first thing I like broke out in tears and I said, oh my God, I'm so glad you're alive. Because like, I didn't know if he would be alive. And he was like, I know, thank you. And he looked good. He like had some meat on his bones. Like he like looked like it. And he's like, and then he would, I'm friends with him on Facebook now. And he would send me a message like, it's been 2 years since I've been sober. Like, just like kind of like keeping in touch. And so like, you know, like you have all these things. And then you have stories like, I mean, even like you and your sisters. Like I have a picture in my classroom right now of like the 4 of us when Kaylee graduated 8th grade. And then I have the 4 of us when Kaylee graduated high school, you know, and it's like you look and it's like, I love seeing the stories and seeing like the successes and like knowing that like, you know, even if you had a teeny tiny impact on that, like how cool that is, you know? And like, so you want to like, what does it mean to be a teacher in New Jersey? I mean, like, what does it mean to be a teacher anywhere? There's a book, Frank McCourt wrote, Teacher Man, right? And there's a section, and I have like a picture saved on my phone where it says something like, and I'm just paraphrasing because I don't know it by heart, but it says something like, you call yourself a teacher? And his response was like, no, I'm more than that and much less than that. Like I'm a therapist and I'm a doctor and I'm a mother and I'm a sister and I'm a brother and I'm, you know, a dryer of tears and there is so much more. So like to be a teacher in New Jersey, like there's no such thing as just being a teacher. You are so many things to so many kids at different times. And so I think that that's what's important to remember is that teaching is not like, oh, I'm teaching English and I'm going to only be about this book or about this paper. It's so much bigger than that. And I think that that's usually the parts that make it good. You know, and I say to like my students all the time that I think kids in college kids going into education should be required to take a certain number of credits in like counseling. Because even though you're not a guidance counselor, when they show up in your room crying because something, and sometimes it's small. My friend's mad at me. Sometimes it is huge. Sometimes it is huge to the point where you're caught off guard, and now you have to handle it as best as you can until you can get them to somebody who is trained to handle it. And so like you are like, I mean, there's kids who like come to my room just for a Band-Aid. I don't even know them. I heard you have Band-Aids. Yes, I always have Band-Aids. I had a boy the other day. He was like, listen, Kopp, like, you just like know you're like everyone's mom. Like, you know that, right? And it's not because I'm old enough to be their mom, because I'm not, but it's because it's my like tendency, my personality. It's like the motherly part of me where I hug them when they're sad. I had a senior, sobbing in class the other day, and she was arguing with another girl. And I was like, why don't you guys go in the hallway? Because everyone's listening. Right. They go in the hallway. They don't come back. I go out there. I send the other girl in. And this girl is heaving to the point that I think she's going to throw up. Like she's sobbing so badly. So instinctually, I wrap my arms around her. And then after a few minutes, her head's like in my like collarbone. She's sobbing. And I go, wait, are you okay? Are you okay that I'm hugging you? And she starts laughing in her sobs, and she just nods her head, yes, you know, that she's okay, that she's like sobbing all over me. And then like, you know, she called her boyfriend, he walked her to guidance, I went back to class. And, you know, while I was gone, the phone rang, of course, in my room. Another student answered it and, like, sent somebody else. Like, it was like, we took care of it. Don't worry, you know, like, but, like, there's so much more. And there's so many good things that happen, too. The emails about, like, I got into this college. Or one of the girls that was in my Tomorrow's Teachers class, she got early acceptance into the College of New Jersey. And she like sent me a message over the weekend with a picture of her letter. And then when I saw her, she goes, I couldn't believe it. Like, I tried to call my mom and she didn't answer. And then the next person I wanted to tell was you, but I didn't want to be a weirdo and try to call you. I was like, it's okay. You could have. And she was like, I just needed you to know, you know? And so like being a teacher is like everything. It's all encompassing, and really good teachers. Like, I don't have a job. Like, I've never had a job. I hardly even have a career. Like, it's like a lifestyle, and it's who you are. It's like my whole family, all four of us were at the choir concert, you know? So like Mr. Kopp can like be a celebrity with his former students, and like I could support my current students, and my kids could see like this is our life. And like, so like, and I'm sure like your mom would even like echo that it is your entire life. It's everything all the time, and it's, you know, it's all the time. It's the reason why you say be careful over prom weekend. It's the reason why you reach out and say, how's college? You know, it's the reason why they come back. I mean, I have students who hated English who like email me and say like, thank you for being there, because I'm 23 now, and like I always think about you and remember how like kind you were. You know? And so like
So sweet.
that's a very long answer to your question, and it's a lot of stories. But like, I think if you ask any teacher, it's like being a teacher in New Jersey or anywhere is so much more than just being a teacher. And you grow into that.
Right.
You grow into that. You don't just walk in saying, I know how to do all this. You have experiences, you grow, you age and mature. And to be honest, like 10 years ago when I became a parent, I instantly became a better teacher. Because all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to have a kid that you love more than anything. Now I know what those parents feel like, and all these kids are their babies. And so you look at things in a different perspective because you become a parent. And so, I mean, I obviously love being a teacher, and I can't imagine doing anything else. But it's so much more than people think that it is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. It's so much more.
I'm like in awe.
No, you're too sweet.
I think it's also really refreshing to hear a teacher who speaks of the profession in such a, you know, positive.
And it's not for you. Like, I'm not doing it like because you're interviewing me.
No.
Like, I don't talk about teaching a lot, you know? I mean, it's just what I do. Right. So when I get the opportunity to talk about it, I like can't help but become excited, because it really is still what I love, you know? And like, I mean, I go to school every day, like, and I'm happy to be there. Sure, there are other days you would listen. If we started a little later, I mean, we wake up at the crack of dawn. So, like, I mean, it's really the timing that's always like, oh, I'm so exhausted. But like, you want to be there, and you want to be with your kids, and like, you know, and you know what's amazing is, like I said before, like, when I know I'm going to be out, like Braden had his concert, so I had to take a personal day this week because it was in the morning. And I said to the kids, I won't be here tomorrow. And they're like, you won't? Why? Why won't you be here? And I'm like, it's okay. Like and I say, Bray is a concert. And they're like, oh, that's so great. Have fun. And then they're supporting me. And then, like I said, when every day, you know, the 5 classes I teach, when the class ends, thank you, Mrs. Kopp. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Like, and then they send me emails. I saw this article and it relates to Frankenstein, and I had to show it to you. And I think, how does this happen? You know, like, how could you want to do something else? And so, of course, like, are there frustrations? Has Chris Christie made it hard to say I'm a teacher in New Jersey? Yeah. But the bottom line is, and this is what someone told me years ago, and it's true, teachers will be there far longer than any politician, far longer than any standard that's put out there that's going to make your job hard, longer than any administrator. Teachers teach for 30 to 45 years. We're going to outlive all of these hardships. And so, like, you have to stay positive, because you don't want to give up, because it's who you are, it's your love, and it'll change.
Right.
You know, for better or worse, but it always changes. So
that's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for interviewing me. I love it.
Oh, I could stay here forever.
Yeah. Come in. I know. We'll cook in the kitchen. I know.
I'll come back.
I know.
That was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Danielle. And thanks for listening to We Persisted with Chelsea Rivera. If you like our show, want to learn more, or share with a friend, please check out http://cpr294.wixsite.com/wepersisted. If you have a story to tell, please share online. We want to hear your voice. Join us next time when we talk to Lucretia. And remember, to thank a teacher, stand up in solidarity for teachers, and join their fight.